So let's start comparing different types of insurance contracts. So here in this exercise here, I'm going to be comparing a no contract, which is going to have so no contract means no superscript. Superscript, by the way, so subscript is right. So if I have IH, right, that low h is a subscript. If I draw a P up here, that P is the superscript, right? It's a letter you write sort of above another letter. So no superscript. We're going to have a partial fair contract. Which is going to be denoted as a P. And then we're going to have a full fair contract. Which is going to be denoted with an F. Okay, so you guys have seen this graph a few times already, right? This is our basic utility versus income graph for someone who's getting sick. So actually, now that I'm looking at this, I'm going to need to alter this a little bit. So let me move this down a little bit. Okay, not great, but we'll fix that. We'll fix it. So not what I wanted to do, but close. Solid. We're going to go perfect. Then we're going to say, okay, yes, let's say my income for being sick is down here. And let's make it even lower. We're really miserable when we're sick, right? Let's say we're making very little money when we're sick. Then we got, and so we get that this is IS, right? And so I'm just gonna, right? And again, we'll say there's a 50% chance that we get sick, right? So, right, we'll say there's like a 50% chance you get sick. So, we'll just draw a line. No, not right. We'll just draw a line like that for a 50% chance you get sick, right? So if you get no insurance, right, then and I'm going to label the graph as follows. So H equals utility when healthy. S equals utility when sick. And A is going to be expected utility. Right, so here we have S, here we have H, right? This is the uninsured thing, so there's no superscripts. And right here is my expected utility, A, when there is no contract. So let's say I have a partial contract, right? So that means, let's say it's a partial fair contract. It's going to look something like this. And let me lower that one down a little bit, actually, just so the graph's a little clearer. Perfect. All right, let's say this is a partial but fair contract. Right, so we get, right, so here we get this point here is going to be my expected utility from a partial contract. I have my utility when healthy, my utility when sick. Notice that what's going on with the partial contract, right? My utility when I'm sick goes up, right? But my utility when I'm healthy goes down, right? And that's because I'm paying some amount, I'm paying a premium even when I'm healthy, and so my utility actually drops when I'm healthy. But that also, as a result of my utility going up when I'm sick, that increases my expected utility overall, right? So the utility I get from a partial insurance contract is higher than the utility I get from a full insurance contract. Now, what does, or sorry, my utility I get from a partial insurance contract is greater than the utility I get from no insurance contract. And then what does a full insurance contract look like? It's just that point there. It's AF, which is equal to my utility when I'm my expected utility under a full insurance contract is equal to my utility in the sick state, which is also equal to my utility in the healthy state if my insurance contract is full, right? So you'll notice that the individual prefers, right? The individual, if they don't know whether they're going to get sick or not, they prefer the full contract to the partial contract, and they prefer the partial contract to the no contract state, right? So let's make a table showing the different types of insurance contract you can have in this very simple model. So all right. So we have fair, unfair, and then we have full and partial. All right, so let's go over what Q and R is in each of these states. So in a full fair contract, we have that R is equal to PQ, right? That's the odds I get sick times the payout I get sick. And my payout in a full fair contract is equal to the difference in my income between the sick state and the healthy state, right? If I have a full fair contract, my expected income is the same as my income in both states, right? Now, if I have a full unfair contract, right, it's full, so we still have that Q is equal to IH minus IS, right? So I earn the same amount of money in either state. However, the insurance premium is greater than the odds I get sick times the payout, right? So the insurance company is making some money off of this. Note that I may agree to an unfair contract, right? Even if the insurance company is making some money in an expectation I'm losing some money, right? Let's go back to the previous thing, right? Let's say that I might be willing to agree to a contract, for instance, a full insurance contract that's unfair that puts me here, right? I would prefer to have the full contract, right? Because my utility rises. But it's still better than a fair partial contract or no contract at all, right? So a rational person who's risk averse may agree to an unfair contract, right? Okay, so then let's go over a partial fair contract. So it's fair. So on average, the payout is equal to the probability I get sick times my payout, right? The premium is equal to the probability I get sick times the payout. But it's partial. So the odds that when my payout is not enough to fully compensate me between the sick and health states, and so I'm still better off in the healthy state than I am in the sick state, right? So that's a full partial contract is what we drew in the previous slide. And then an unfair partial contract, this is the worst type of insurance contract. We'd have R greater than PQ, right? So my premium is more than the probability I get sick times my payout. So on average, I'm losing money on the contract, and the insurance company is making money, and the insurance company is not fully compensating me for it, right? Now, note that I may agree to an unfair partial contract. It's imperfect, right? It's not great, but it may be better than not being insured at all, right? So let's say I have an unfair partial contract, right? And let's say the unfair partial contract is going to pay this much in the healthy state and this much in the sick state, right? So you'll notice that like my average payoff there is about here, right? Which is not as good as the full insurance contract. But it's still higher than my payoff when I'm uninsured, right? And notice that's a very let's make it a little more extreme, right? Let's make a different partial contract that only pays this much when it's low pays the same amount as the full partial contract when it's high, right? No, I'm still better off for having that unfair partial contract, right? So simply because a contract is unfair or partial or both doesn't mean that it's not worth it, right? I may agree, as a consumer, I might agree to a unfair partial contract, right? And whether a contract is fair or unfair, if I have a choice between a fair partial contract or a full unfair contract, that depends on the contract, right? So here's an example of a this is an example, right? So I always, this is going to be full unfair. So this is an example of a full unfair contract where I prefer, right? Here I prefer the partial contract to the full, I prefer the partial fair contract to the full unfair contract, right? But I could also have a full unfair contract that puts me at here. And this one, here I prefer the full unfair contract to the partial fair contract, right? So whether I prefer a full unfair contract to a partial fair contract depends on how fair and how full we're talking about, right? So it depends on the exact parameters, right? The exact numbers I give you for the contract. So that's the basics of insurance, why somebody might want insurance, things like that. Next time, we're going to start going into some problems with insurance. So I explained in this lecture why you might want insurance, right? You might want insurance because you're risk averse, because you prefer certainty, you prefer having a certain amount of income to an uncertain amount of income, right? Assuming that the average income between the certain and uncertain states is the same, right? That's why you might be interested in insurance. And why, just side note, this isn't really, we don't really think about things from the insurance company so much in this lecture. We're going to really start thinking about things from the insurance company's perspective next lecture. Why might an insurance company be willing to sell you insurance, right? Well, an insurance company, let's say we have, why might an insurance company be willing to sell you a fair contract, right? So contracts where on average they make no money, right? So remember, in economics, if you're not making, if something neither benefits nor harms you, with once you take into account all the costs and all the benefits, then you're willing to do it, right? So if you make no money, you're willing to do something. But you might say, wait, aren't insurance companies risk averse too? And the answer is we don't normally think, in economics, at least in this course, we're not going to think about insurance companies as risk averse. We're going to think of them as risk neutral. And the reason for that is that risk. So if you're deciding whether you're going to be sick or not, whether to buy an insurance contract, whether to buy health insurance because you're unsure whether you'll get sick or not, you're making that decision, and it's just based on you, right? So your average outcome is not going to be your outcome, right? Because you have a very small sample size where it's just you getting sick. An insurance company can insure 100,000 people, and if you have 100,000 people, your overall profit is your expected profit is pretty similar to your expected profit is pretty similar to your your actual profit you're going to end up with, right? So if you're insuring 100,000 people, you're almost certain you're going to end up with a total profit that's very similar to your expected profit. And so insurance companies, because they sort of spread risk out over many people, are less risk averse than people are who can only they can't spread risk because they only have themselves, right? So what an insurance company is doing is what effectively an insurance company doing is, let's say you and I both buy insurance contracts. I get sick, you don't. What an insurance company is effectively doing is being a middleman and making it so you pay me when I'm sick and you're not, so that I'm better off when I'm sick. And then the reverse is true too. I pay you when you're sick, right? The insurance company, you can think, in principle, we could insure each other, right? Where we just agree, hey, like, Liam, if you get sick, I'll give you part of your, I'll give you some money, and then if I get sick, you give me some money. We could just agree to that as people. What an insurance company does is it's sort of a middleman that lets people who don't know each other do that. And that's why an insurance company is willing to sell people insurance. Even if the individuals within the insurance company running the company are risk averse, the insurance company will still act as though it's risk neutral, which is why it's willing to make fair contracts in some cases. So, next lecture, we are going to go into Akerlof's Market for Lemons. We're going to show how this was, like, we see insurance here, looks great from the consumer side. We're going to start thinking about the insurance company side, and we're going to see how insurance contracts can fall apart very quickly next lecture. I look forward to seeing you there.